Hello, welcome to this brief video, which is just going to give you a little bit of guidance with regards to the Nearpod. You will find on the Nearpod questions which I suppose are very similar to these, and your job really is once having had a little bit of guidance, you can go on and have a go at them yourself. Okay, so I'll show you this answer first of all, and then I'll quickly show you the Nearpod question, and then we'll hopefully then you'll have a little go at it yourself, and that'll be part of your revision. Okay, so these are what I call the tricky Szasz questions. Szasz is one of those ones which I think it's a very interesting piece of research, isn't it? However, people do tend to find it a little bit hard getting their head around how to answer the questions on it. So this particular question says, in the key research by Szasz, mental illness is described as a metaphor. What does Szasz mean by this? There's lots of different ways in which you can be asked questions about Szasz. Obviously, you can't really be asked too much about the methodology because the methodology is a review article, isn't it? But what you can be asked is what he actually said, and he said quite a lot of things, didn't he? And sometimes he kind of contradicts himself. However, in terms of answering questions on this, the big ones to look out for are metaphors, obviously, so we've got that, which we'll look at in this question. Myth, okay, so he talks about mental illness as being a myth. He also talked about mental illness as being politicized, and several other things as well. So you can just pull out, I suppose, the main things that he said. Okay, right, but the question is asking us about the metaphor and what does he mean by this. So it should be a fairly straightforward question. However, students do tend to get this one a bit mixed up. Now, remember, a metaphor is just basically just something which we're using to describe something else, isn't it? And in this particular case, what he said is that mental illness is almost like a label that we give to a type of behaviour. So if there's a type of behaviour that we see in society that we find difficult to deal with, and I'm sure you can think of many examples of that, then what we tend to do is we tend to label that as mental illness. Now, you might say, well, so what? The problem is that mental illness comes with a stigma, doesn't it? Even today, there is a stigma associated with calling someone mentally ill. And more so than that, Szasz would say, well, actually, that's problematic in more ways than just it being a stigma, because it's not actually correct either. It's not a valid diagnosis that someone's given. Anyway, we'll go on to that a bit in a second. Let's just see what I've said here. Szasz says that mental illness is a metaphor for behaviour that society finds difficult to understand and may cause distress to other people. Okay, so that's his claim, right? It's a label that is given to people who we find difficult to be around for whatever reason. Once you've done that, you're good to go with the rest of Szasz's claims, really, but you have to get that bit first, because otherwise the rest of it doesn't logically flow. So I've put here, for instance, that he argues that it's a metaphor for undiagnosed biological illnesses of the brain. Right, so yeah, that's what he would claim. He would claim that actually there is if someone is acting in a particular way, there's a very, very good chance that that is for a biological reason. You might say, well, that still makes it a mental illness. Well, no, if you think about it, and I think he makes a very decent fist of this argument in actual fact, because what he says is, look, if it's a biological reason, then call it a biological disease. Then there's no need to call it mental illness, because what you're doing, like I say, is stigmatizing. He argues that mental illnesses have often been found to be undiagnosed physical illnesses. Okay, lots of different examples of that, which we'll use on the next slide in actual fact. And then he says, over the years, many mental illnesses have been found to have a biological basis, and there exists no biological test for mental illness. It alleged that the term mental illness is used to justify psychiatric coercion. So you can see basically how you can then just simply talk more about what Szasz has said, but you have to get that metaphor bit right to start off with. Right, well, what is the question I've given you? Let's just have a look here. So on your Nearpod, what you can do with these is you can actually fill these in. Move that up slightly. You can fill these in on here. I'm sure you've used Nearpods before, haven't you? But I've called it the tricky Szasz question. You can find a mark scheme for it from that little link there. And there's the question. And the key research by Szasz, mental illness is described this case as a myth, right? So if you're talking about it as being a myth, don't start talking about metaphors to start off with. You need to talk about the fact that he describes it as a myth because there are no biological tests for it. He believes that it's an undiagnosed biological illness or a problem with living or something like that. But there is no such actual thing as a mental illness. And then talk about obviously some of the other things, like, for instance, you've had people labelled with mental illness before, who that's been a label which has been socially constructed. For instance, homosexuality or hysteria or other conditions like beriberi, for instance, has been found to have a biological cause. Other were just simply socially constructed, etc. So you can do that. It's only 3 marks for that, so you don't have to go crazy. The second one is a little bit more tricky. I think you've had this on an exam previously. I'm not sure how well it was answered, but you might think to yourself, oh crikey, they're asking us to evaluate Szasz. Szasz is actually not that hard to evaluate, really. All you have to do is to kick into the whole validity business. Okay, so if you're talking about Szasz making a claim here that is, mental illness is a myth, I would be talking about, well, is that a valid claim or is it not? Well, it could be valid, couldn't it? Because it is backed up by some data. For instance, you could claim. Not even just claim, you could definitely point to the fact that mental illnesses that were mental illnesses previously have now been declassified as such. Therefore, there was never a mental illness there in the first place, which is what Szasz says, and he's absolutely right by that. So he is making a valid claim about mental illnesses being a myth because they've been, like I say, declassified previously. The second thing to say is that in terms of validity, well, maybe not, because his research method is a review article. Yeah, so a review article is just a subjective opinion about something, isn't it? Much as we might agree or disagree with whichever, the very fact that he's used a review article here would be problematic with regards to his claims. So you can do like a couple of short pecks for that, really. That would work quite nicely for that. Okay, hopefully that will help you to do that.